start off with a domino like 1 inch tall by something like 38 dominoes. You have a domino big enough to touch the moon. That was the analogy in the book. And I think that's the focus is if we say financial freedom, that's a big domino. I can't push that domino over from where I'm standing today. And I remember when I first started getting into the game of financial freedom, it did feel unobtainable. But it wasn't until I came back to the little teeny domino today. Where am I at today? Okay, cool. I'm in debt today. How do I get out of debt? What's the one thing I can do this quarter that will make a dent towards that debt? And knock over that little domino, and one domino after another domino in succession, you start to build the habits that make the end domino of financial freedom inevitable. You start to build momentum. And so that's where I'd come back to kind of this full circle. We've got to come back to where we're at today. The facts of our moment today. Are we saving money? Are we making enough money? Are we in debt? And start to figure out what's the one thing that I can do. If I can do this thing, it'll make everything else easier or unnecessary.
Well, didn't you do that? I mean,
I did. Yeah.
Credit card debt.
Well, right. You know, I used to be a school teacher when I was like 23. I got into like $10,000 in credit card debt, which does not seem a lot in today's standards. But, you know, I was only making $30,000 a year. So, I mean, and I was paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. And so, you know, I think when you're in debt or when you're kind of behind, you know, you just take out another credit card or pick up another loan or, you know, to you, it's all about like the monthly payment, really. And you don't really pay attention, or at least I didn't, to your finances when you're living like that because there's no goal. There's no why. You're living day to day and buying things for day to day. So when I stopped and I'm like, I can't, you know, keep living like this. So I moved home. I got a different job. All my money for like 2 years all my extra money went straight to my credit cards, paid off my car, just kind of got out of debt completely. And then when you are out of debt completely, you have this clarity around you where you're like, I don't want to do that again because that sucked, right? And so then you start actually putting together a budget and you're more cognizant of where you spend your money and what you spend your money on. And to your point, that was like a domino. And then it gives you the skills to then start saving money, because you don't just go back to paying off your debt and then all that extra money, you're like, great, I can just buy more stuff now, you know, you're more cognizant. So then now you're saving money and you're like, okay, I'm out of debt, but I really want, for me, it was a condo. So then I started saving all my money to buy my first condo. And then, you know, and it just kind of escalates from there. Yeah. But I understand that feeling of feeling like it's like insurmountable.
But I want to bring up one thing just before we pass over that story, because I think there's a lot of courage and a lot of habit changes that you had to go through to make that happen. But I want to bring up one that a lot of people might be afraid of, and that is that when you moved home, everybody was looking at you. Your parents,
you
had just gotten a degree, and you moved home, and so you've got that psychology as well, kind of, you know, hitting the beach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, how did you get over that?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, you know, my parents are like, well, you know, you're not teaching anymore. And I think I actually went back into bartending at the time because I was making more money. And then I was just throwing all of the money towards, you know, I was making pretty good money, but all towards the debt and my car and, you know, different things like that. And yeah, I mean, luckily for me, I was young. I was like 23, 24, 25. I think it would be harder at like 35 or 40 to do that. But you still have to, because you have to look at where you're at and where you want to be. And if you keep doing the same things, you're not going to do that.
Can I jump in on that? I love that we're talking about this. And I don't know when this will come out, but especially around New Year's when people are thinking a little bit more proactively. I did the same thing with 2 kids. I moved in, so we lived in a house on a golf course. It was so funny. I've never golfed in my entire life, kid. But we lived in a house on a golf course because I thought that was a symbol of whatever, making it. But I was nowhere close to financial freedom. And once I got absolutely committed and clear that I wanted to be financially free, I was I'll never forget sitting in that hospital room with my son. I realized how fragile my life was, how fragile time was. And I had to find a way to master money so I can master my life. And so when I got clear and my wife and I got committed to this idea, we sold our house. We moved in a house, went from a mortgage about $3,500 a month to $1,200 a month. And I can't even tell you the level of happiness that went into our life because we were living in a house that just kept us so tight. But before we moved into this house where we went to $1,200 a month, we spent 3 months with my in-laws living in their basement. And I remember thinking, man, everyone thought I was broke. They thought I was, destitute. And I was just committed. And I started to prioritize every decision that I made towards that outcome, financial freedom in 10 years or less. And so living in my in-laws basement gave me time, capacity, clarity around how to start managing money. And then when we went back into the game of having a mortgage, we sold our cars. I drove a hell damaged Toyota Corolla. We sold our house. We directed everything towards this idea of financial freedom. And within 4 years, I walked away from a 6-figure salary. And I remember at that time, everyone's like, how did you do it? I'm like, man, I made some of the decisions in alignment with a major definite aim that you're maybe unwilling to make, but I was willing to make those decisions because of prioritization.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out that they seem monumental, but they're really short term.
Yeah.
In
the scheme of
in the scheme of everything. And so some people perceive this as risk. I think the situation that you're in, if you are in this situation, is much higher risk.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're minimizing your risk by making these short-term decisions, which are going to create better lifestyle choices later. Right.
Totally.
But there has to be some sacrifice and discomfort, because I talk to people sometimes, and, the barrier of homeownership right now is high.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk to younger people and I'm like, you really should, instead of living in this luxury apartment, you really should move back in with your parents, or you should rent, like a cheaper apartment or have a roommate. And, I really want a house, but I don't want to do that, and it's like, but you don't want a house that bad then,
Yeah.
because if you did, there's sacrifices that you have to make. But to Ken's point, there's such short term, people need to think, 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line, not just in the next couple of years, how am I going to feel? Or I can tell you that my friends, I had a business and I was just saving money. So I lived in this crappy apartment. I drove my old car. I had plenty of money to rent a nicer apartment. I had plenty of money to buy a new car, but I just didn't. And so they all just thought that I just wasn't doing well, right? And then, they would always ask me, like, why don't you get a new car? Or why do you live here? And I just say, I'm saving for a condo. That's what I'd always say. And finally, it took like 4 or 5 years, but I bought a condo, and I bought it with almost all cash because I couldn't get lending. And anyways, but then they're like, oh my gosh, Neil's doing so great. Like, it was like, I had my own condo, I had my business, I got a car.